I want to tell you a story. About 9 to 10 years ago, one of the greatest things to ever happen in American television history went down. It was the final episode of a very popular sitcom, and they even doubled the show's usual runtime, so you had an entire hour to say one last goodbye to these characters. Pretty much the whole time this show was on the air, it was one of the most popular things in America, if not the world. On average, it was pulling in 15 million viewers per week, and it ran for 12 years and 262 episodes. The reviews for the ending were interesting. Entertainment Weekly called it one of the most fascinating finales to air. Variety called it seriously misguided, and Time magazine said it was self-indulgent but a nice gesture in its own black-hearted way. IGN put it more simply, "I don't think I could come up with a worse ending." This whole story played out less than a decade ago, and yet sometimes I feel like I'm the only person who even remembers it happened. At one point in time, it felt like it was impossible to avoid hearing about this story, and today, nobody talks about it. But before we're ready to talk about it, there's so much context, there's so much we need to explain, and I need to work up the confidence to do it. I'm talking about the ending too, of course. 2.5 Men. There's two key players we need to talk about in this story, the first of which is Charlie Sheen. Sheen was born into a really successful acting family. His dad's Martin Sheen, aka the guy from Apocalypse Now, the president in The West Wing, and the real Seymour Skinner from that episode where people say The Simpsons got bad. So Charlie had no choice but to follow in his father's footsteps and went into acting. He did a few small roles before finally landing one of the main characters in the 1986 film Platoon. It's a pretty good Vietnam War film. It's directed by the guy who made JFK, so there's this huge anti-government vibe running through it. It made $138 million on a budget of just $6. Sheen becomes famous overnight, and the roles just keep coming in. Wall Street, Young Guns. He even does a buddy cop movie alongside Clint Eastwood called The Rookie. I haven't seen it. A couple of years later, Sheen's getting a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. But after the success of Platoon, Charlie Sheen's serious roles never really made that much money. So he completely switches his style up, and he does the only thing any serious actor can do when they want to keep getting work. He starts doing comedy films. Sheen finds a lot of success in doing this because he's really good at it. He does the movie Major League, then Money Talks with Chris Tucker, but the real success is a movie called Hot Shots, a parody of all sorts of American movies, but especially Top Gun. It does so well that they make a sequel, this time parodying Rambo. This goes on for a while. At the start of the 2000s, Sheen is in his mid to late 30s. He ends up on a sitcom called Spin City because the show's previous lead, Michael J. Fox, has to leave because of health reasons. The show ends 2 years later in 2002. And now Sheen's looking for work. He's well respected in the industry and by audiences, but he doesn't really know what to do next, when suddenly, this script for a sitcom lands in front of him, written by this guy who's slowly been rising in the TV comedy world, Chuck Lorre. Despite being a writer, Lorre's story of how he ended up at 2.5 Men is far more cinematic than Sheen's. And out of every TV showrunner on Earth, his life story might be the easiest to trace, because one of Lorre's trademarks is vanity cards. You know, whenever a sitcom ends, it has all of those logos fly by?
Absolutely.
Whenever Lorre produces a show, he puts a little card at the end, and it's usually his thoughts and feelings on stuff that's been happening. So it's stuff about his personal life, maybe a poem he's written, fights he's had about the show, and anything else he feels like sharing. It's actually kind of a cool and vulnerable thing to do. But his story starts in the early 70s, when Lorre attends the State University of New York at Potsdam, but drops out after only 2 years. He decides to travel around the USA, working as both a musician and as a songwriter. In the 10 years he does this, his biggest claim to fame is the song French Kissin', which Debbie Harry would then go cover in 1986. That's pretty cool, honestly. It's not exactly lucrative work though, and he struggles to make ends meet. It's around this time he gets married and he has a child. And in a few years he'll have another one. Lorre's children are important to his story because it means no matter what, he was willing to do anything to try to find work. and his strong work ethic runs throughout all of this. He ends up working 2 grueling jobs. In the day, Lorre goes round to random office buildings where he knows no one and then tries his best to sell them anything he can. And at night, he moonlights as a singer, playing weddings, events, anything really to try to make as much money as possible. In the 80s, Lorre eventually decides his music career is going nowhere fast, and he tries his hand at writing TV. He has no experience, education, or formal training in writing TV shows whatsoever, but manages to convince a TV documentary producer to let him write the narration for his program. It's not a lot, but it's something. One day, while incredibly depressed, Lorre walks into a random office building and starts his usual routine. He's chatting, he's making polite conversation, and it turns out he's in the offices of DIC, the children's animation company. I don't know what exactly goes down that day, but he walks into that building with the intent to sell some employees knickknacks they don't need, and he comes out convincing DIC to let him write for them. They're currently working on an animated show about a mischievous orange cat that loves to steal food. That's right, Heathcliff. Lorre pitches DIC an episode called An Officer and an Alley Cat, where Heathcliff attends military school because he thinks he's gonna get free food. It's about as complex as any episode of 2.5 Men. Slowly, Lorre starts climbing the ranks of children's TV. He works on a whole bunch of shows. At one point, he was at Marvel's animation studio. Did you know he co-wrote the theme song to the 1987 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like Heroes in a Half Shell? That's him. Either way, Lorre starts writing spec scripts for shows he'd like to write for. These were screenplays for The Golden Girls, Miami Vice, even the 80s Twilight Zone reboot that nobody remembers exists unless they're writing a YouTube video. He pitches a script for a show called Charles in Charge, and they actually pay him for it. And then he does another. And before you know it, that traction starts building and snowballing, and Lorre ends up at the #1 rated TV show in America at the time, Roseanne. Roseanne is a complicated show to talk about, but essentially Lorre works on season 3 and 4 of the show in a producer role, and he does a really good job. Good enough that he gets the opportunity to leave and develop his own show, Franny's Turn.
What are you hiding from me?
These aren't real.
Saturday, it's your turn.
Whenever I get angry, you want to stick food in my mouth.
Because Saturday, it's Franny's turn.
Because I can't stick it where I really want.
It gets cancelled after 5 episodes. He creates a few more shows during this period, but the real big hit is Dharma and Greg, a sitcom about a yoga instructor who marries a suit and tie lawyer, and the sort of comedy that comes from them having opposing worldviews. Something that's gotten lost over the years is that Lorre isn't the only creator of 2.5 Men. There's another guy, Lee Aronson. Look at this guy's Wikipedia page. There's 12 sentences. In some ways, 2.5 Men is the ultimate American sitcom, because it fundamentally would not have existed if it wasn't for the miracle of health insurance. Aronson tells Lorre he's having trouble finding consistent work, and if he doesn't write something soon, he's gonna lose his union health insurance. And Lorre, having been poor for a large portion of his life, steps in and says, why don't we pitch something together so you can keep it? Lorre at this point is a really successful showrunner. He's definitely further in his career than Aronson is. He didn't have to do this, but he does it anyway, because that's the right thing to do. They get together and pitch a show idea to CBS boss Leslie Moonves and say they're thinking of a Charlie Sheen style actor to play the lead role. Spin City had just ended and Sheen was playing kind of a playboy in that too. Moonves says he'll only approve the pilot if they can get Charlie Sheen, and after speaking to him, he's only willing to do it if they show him a script. In the space of about 2 weeks, Lorre and Aronson whip up a script called 2.5 Men, and the rest is history. I don't think I'm saying anything controversial by claiming 2.5 Men is a bad show. Every television critic on earth was saying this during its 12-season run. But 2.5 Men is also bad in a very unique way. Usually when a sitcom's not good, it's just not funny. Like the jokes don't land, not a lot happens in every episode, and the characters are written like cardboard. I don't think anyone would call 2.5 Men well written. But it's not written badly either. 2.5 Men is actually kind of a well-constructed show. It's just that what it's constructing is horrible. And for all of its faults, and there sure are a lot, It does have really well-defined characters, all of whom bring something different to the table. Don't let the title of the show fool you. 2.5 Men definitely has a main character, and it's Charlie. He's a wealthy bachelor who wants to live his life, avoiding responsibilities and just dating random women. But his brother, Alan, has recently been divorced, and so he ends up moving in with Charlie. And also, he brings his son, Jake. The source of the show's main comedy is how these three relationships interact. You have a guy who just wants to be left alone. You have a kind of pathetic person who's just really needy, and a child who doesn't really understand what's happening. In other words, they're all childish in their own unique ways, and they bring a different style of comedy to the show. That's good writing. That's planning. That's not something you typically see in bad sitcoms. But these characters aren't anything new, they're stereotypes. You could point to pretty much any classic sitcom and find at least someone who's very similar to them, and that's kind of what made 2.5 Men work. It wasn't really innovating with anything new, it was just synthesizing a lot of classic sitcom stuff and repackaging it for a new audience. Like, for example, the jokes in 2.5 Men aren't bad in the way you might be expecting from a show like this. They're actually written as jokes. They have setups and they have punchlines.
Morning.
What's good about it?
I didn't say good.
That's funny. That's how you write a joke. It's just...
A couple of days max, she will come to her senses.
Yeah, that's what women do.
Wait, what did he just say? That was from the pilot. It feels like every third joke in the show is about how men just can't resist boobies. And if they do, even for a second, they're gay. The jokes are always the most base, low-hanging fruit imaginable, and a lot of the time they push into weirdly racist, xenophobic, homophobic. Basically, if you can think of something offensive, it's probably in the show. The thing is, it is possible to make these jokes and do them well. Arrested Development started only a year after 2.5 Men, and it also has jokes about people being addicted to sex, and even calls characters gay as a joke. But you know what the difference between the two was? About 10 million viewers. It's kind of expected that the very first episode of a TV show always does really well, a lot better than the rest of the season, usually because they put a new show next to something that's already successful. But Arrested Development's viewers continue to decline over time, while 2.5 Men managed to continue pulling in a huge audience. It's not hard to see why critics dislike 2.5 Men either. In an era where writers and showrunners were trying to really revolutionize what the sitcom could be and do, 2.5 Men played it fairly straight. It's doing the multi-camera, obviously fake set, live audience laughing sort of thing. And it wasn't innovating with the characters like I said. The irony is that everything that makes 2.5 Men bad is also the same reason that the show was able to pull in millions of viewers. The jokes are easy to understand because you don't really need to know anything. MASH required you to know at least what war was as a concept. Fresh Prince requires you to know what life is like for black people in America. But the only thing 2.5 Men demands you know is traditional masculinity. You don't even really need to know other episodes of the show. There's no character arcs, nobody changes, nobody grows. The only exception is Jake, and I think the only reason he does is because he goes from being a 10-year-old to like 22. You can't hide that. Plus, as the show goes on, the jokes get more and more crude, until it's straight up just about Charlie hiring sex workers. Like, look at this. 2.5 Men always names episodes after quotes from the show. Here's a couple of episode titles so you get the picture of what I'm talking about. Weekend in Bangkok with 2 Olympic gymnasts. Your dismissive attitude towards boobs. Arguments for the quickie. And all of those are from only season 3 out of 12. One of the strangest things about this is that because the humor is so ridiculously obvious, the show ends up being really creative because of it. There's this TV concept called the watershed, which essentially means you can't broadcast material for exclusively adult audiences until it's at least 10 PM. But the whole time 2.5 Men was on the air, it was exclusively in the 8:30 to 9:30 PM time slot. So they can't exactly say a lot of the stuff they're actually talking about, so they have to find all of these creative ways to avoid saying things like, you know, penis.
Tell the doctor that if I was a tree, the rash is predominantly around the mossy trunk area.
After watching a whole bunch of episodes, what's most baffling about 2.5 Men is that the show is almost a commentary on like modern masculinity. Like none of the characters are meant to be perceived as good people, not even in the context of the show. You're always laughing at them rather than with them, and a big part of the show's dynamic is how Charlie and his brother Alan are still being defined by their relationship to their mother. It's a recurring joke that she was a self-centered bad mother to them growing up, and that's why they turned out this way. So Alan is the type of guy to avoid conflict, and his insecurity comes out as putting women on a pedestal and having no self-worth. And at any moment, he's ready to stab people in the back to get whatever he wants, because he fundamentally doesn't trust anybody. Charlie experiences these exact same feelings, but he deals with them by completely avoiding them. Instead of sitting down and confronting his weaknesses, anytime a problem comes up, he just moves on to dating a new woman, or drinking alcohol, or spending more money. He's always focusing on staying alive in the moment so he can continue running away from his problems. And just to be clear, this is all in the show. I know I just analyzed it and pulled it out, but somebody had to write it in the first place.
Charlie, you're a grown man. Perhaps it's time to stop blaming your mother for your own shortcomings.
But the main problem with 2.5 Men is that the show is also way too forgiving of these characters too. Because it's an older sitcom, every time an episode ends, it always has to reset the story. The characters don't learn anything, because if they did, there wouldn't be any 2.5 Men anymore. Would you want to watch 3 Men? Yeah, I didn't think so. So the part that would actually give some sort of weight to the commentary, the part where they have to live with their consequences, it just doesn't exist. This goes on for about 8 seasons. In 2011, quite a lot of things are happening. Rebecca Black's just dropped Friday, Einstein rap battles Stephen Hawking, and Charlie Sheen is 45 years old. Somehow, Sheen is now the highest paid actor in American television. Apparently he makes $27.5 million a year for doing 2.5 Men. If you adjust that for inflation, that's over $38 million in 2024. It's worth noting that Sheen has tried to leave the show before, just a year prior, but I guess nobody can turn down a check that big. But Charlie Sheen is also a horrible person at the time. In 2009, he's accused of domestic abuse, and all the way up till early 2011, there's all of these reports of him drinking and partying in a really destructive manner. In January, Nina Tassler, the president of entertainment at CBS, says this in response to those reports. On a professional level, he does his job, and he does it well. 2 days later, Sheen's admitted to a hospital because of severe stomach pains. Meanwhile, the first half of season 8 of 2.5 Men has already been filmed, and it's on the air. Remember those vanity cards from earlier? Lorre is writing them last minute and comments on what's happening with Sheen in real time. Warning: do not attempt to replicate what you saw in tonight's episode of 2.5 Men. Please keep in mind that we employ a highly paid Hollywood professional who has years of experience with putting his life at risk. And sadly, no, I'm not talking about our stuntman. The next day, Charlie Sheen checks into rehab for his drinking and drug use, and the production of 2.5 Men freezes because you can't make a show without your main character. After a few days go by, Sheen sends all of the press people a very nice public statement that he definitely wrote and not his publicist. Less than 2 weeks after this, while Sheen is still in rehab, he calls into a radio show and says, "Stay away from the crack unless you can manage it socially. If you can manage it socially, then go for it. But not a lot of people can." That same night, the last filmed episode of 2.5 Men airs, and Chuck Lorre writes in the vanity card, "If Charlie Sheen outlives me, I'm gonna be really pissed." On the 16th of February, a statement's released, saying 2.5 Men is going to film the rest of the episodes starting on the 28th. But that's a very corporate statement. There's clearly a lot of anger brewing behind the scenes, probably for years, and Sheen's got a lot of resentment. Lorre gets his opportunity to say what he wants on national TV, but Sheen doesn't get to? That's not fair. So while still in rehab, on February 24th, Sheen organizes a call-in interview to go onto some journalist show and really get it all out there. He's gonna do this. Not his publicist, not some newspaper, him. The world needs to see the real Charlie Sheen, so he has to find someone reasonable, someone who's willing to dig for the real story. So who does he pick? Haha! Uh-oh. Yeah, apparently Charlie Sheen has a good relationship with Alex Jones. Yeah, it turns out Sheen's been calling 9/11 an inside job since at least 2003. Apparently in 2006, he told Alex Jones the Twin Towers fell because of a controlled demolition, but that was a long time ago. It's not like he believes that now. Wait, what movie is he promoting here again? Oh, okay. Could they not wait 3 days? Yeah, this came out in 2017. It's a really weird 9/11 movie, as if that's a genre. He plays some washed billionaire, and like 90% of it takes place in one elevator. I guess it's not that hard to see why Sheen likes Alex Jones so much. And his interview goes as well as Kramer's set at the Laugh Factory. He says a lot of really offensive stuff towards Chuck Lorre, stuff that I don't want to repeat, but it's a lot of insults that turn anti-Semitic. Sheen also says this quote at one point: "The only thing I'm addicted to right now is winning." A couple of hours later, CBS completely cancels the rest of the season of 2.5 Men. What happens next is a once-in-a-lifetime event. There's a very specific window of time that's going to complicate everything that's about to happen. Plenty of celebrities have made the news for having a breakdown, both before and after Charlie Sheen. But there's never been anything similar to what happened here. What changes everything is the internet. The culture of the 2011 internet was very different from where it is now. Nowadays, everything's fragmented. If you're into some sort of niche interest, there's always a specific corner you can go to discuss that thing. Oh, you like custom keyboards? Well, here's a Discord for it. Matter of fact, here's 19. Culture wasn't always like this. Pre-internet, everyone just kind of knew the same stuff. People obviously had their own weird interests, but there was a sort of dominant culture about the popular things at the time. It makes sense why it was set up like this too, because it was born out of older forms of mass communication. Things like TV, the radio, newspapers. They were ways of getting information out to people, and they all had one thing in common. They were a one-way conversation. You couldn't respond to the stories. If you saw a news story that you didn't like, you would have to phone the company, tell them, and then maybe they'd do something? It's not like you could tell. You couldn't insert yourself into the narrative. It wasn't like today, where half the time you need to @ the company on Twitter just to get basic tech support. And because of this one-way process of spreading information, stories and trends would last for a long time. There used to be a phrase called going mainstream, where suddenly everyone knows you and you're just a thing people know overnight, because you've slipped into the mainstream of news. I don't really hear anyone use it anymore though, and that's probably because there really isn't a mainstream anymore. It still happens once in a while, like Doja Cat will get famous, but there's a reason why you can define decades by cultural trends. And then you get to the 2010s, and nobody remembers Pharrell's hat at the 2014 Grammys. Remember Pharrell's hat? Yeah, there's no universal culture anymore. But in 2011, it wasn't like this yet. The ease of access to the internet had gone way up, but there weren't enough sub-communities for all of the new people yet. So there was a huge flood of people starting to use the internet, but they were all being funneled into this already established pipeline of monolithic culture. And TV networks knew this. Because of the conditions in the early 2010s, the internet was powerful enough to directly influence culture as a whole. Remember Coney 2012? Yeah, we'll get him this year. If you could tap into that audience stream as a TV network, that's a whole lot of viewers and money coming directly to you. A few years before 2011, these conditions didn't exist yet. A few years after 2011, the internet as a whole would be so big that TV networks didn't really have any power anymore. What happened with Charlie Sheen could only have happened in these few years. Don't forget that Sheen was one of the most famous celebrities in America at the time as well. He was the main star of a show that was pulling in 15 million viewers weekly. But I would say nowadays, Sheen is not remembered for those 15 million viewers. He's remembered for exactly 1 week in 2011. Like 4 days before 2.5 Men is scheduled to go back into production, the rest of the season is just cancelled. That's a lot of millions of dollars that Sheen no longer has coming to him. So what does Sheen do? The same thing he's been doing for the last 8 years. He goes on TV. He books interviews on every show possible, and because he's an incredibly famous movie and TV star, they're willing to have him. CNN, NBC's Today Show, he even goes on TMZ. But the biggest is a sit-down interview with ABC News, filmed in his own home. Pretty much every line from this interview became a meme. Here's just a few. After being asked if he uses drugs, he says, "I am on a drug. It's called Charlie Sheen." After being asked if he's bipolar, he responds with, "I'm bi winning." After being asked how he survived smoking 7 grams of crack cocaine, he claims he's got tiger blood. And it just keeps going and going and going. Sheen's publicist quits the same day this airs. It's at this moment that the word winning becomes associated with Charlie Sheen like crazy. Charlie Sheen isn't ruining his life, he's actually winning. This whole bit reminds me of those boomer Chuck Norris memes.
I'm Chuck Norris, and I approve this game.
Yeah, okay. What was happening with Charlie Sheen wasn't the way celebrities were meant to be talked about. They had very specific, maintained public images. And how did people on the internet process this weird feeling? The same way they always do. By making stuff. People make photoshops, fake posters, and a whole bunch of music remixes. This starts a really interesting chain effect, because all of this was triggered by one guy doing something in the realm of TV, and people started noticing that on the internet and talking about it. And then they remixed it into new media. And now the story's spreading even more because of that. The original Charlie Sheen ABC interview only has 18 million views to this day. The Shmo Yoho auto-tuned music remix has 66 million. And remember, 2.5 Men was only pulling in like 15 million viewers. This is over 4 times that. People were now getting interested in the story because it had become a meme. A whole new audience had joined in. And because of that, TV networks started covering Charlie Sheen again. Holy shit, was SNL ever funny? It was like an Ouroboros, but combined with that bizarre sense of euphoria you get after vomiting. Something interesting happens if you watch the musical remix of the interview instead. It's funny.
I was banging 7-gram rocks, that's how I roll. Winning.
Over a decade ago, I heard the YouTuber Innuendo Studios say this quote, and it's stuck with me ever since.
And the more compressed information is, the further it can travel on the web.
What the winning meme did was increase Charlie Sheen's reach by millions, but it completely changed how people saw him. It compressed his depth. People were no longer responding to what he was saying as a person, but as a meme. Something that you spend a few minutes looking at before you spend the rest of your day, I don't know, reading webcomics or something. Charlie Sheen pretty much rides the winning meme into the sunset for however long he can. He does a live stream before that was really a thing, and some stand-up tour even though he's never done stand-up before, and according to reviews that was very obvious. He also tries suing Lorre and Warner Brothers, but they end up settling out of court. On July 18th, 2011, Charlie Sheen signs a deal to do another sitcom called Anger Management. It's based on that Adam Sandler, Jack Nicholson movie. It ends up doing a first season of 10 episodes and a second season of 90. That might actually be the most normal thing about this whole story so far. Sheen also hosts the 2011 Gathering of the Juggalos. Lorre is left in a dilemma. He doesn't like Sheen, understandably, but he does like the show. Quality aside, when you work on something creatively for 8 years, it's gonna become a part of you. And if he chooses to end the show here, it won't have an ending, because they never filmed the rest of season 8. He'd be putting an entire cast and crew out of work. The same thing that Sheen did. So Lorre has to try right this ship and save this sinking sitcom. A sitcom that has now lost its main character. So what does he do? The sensible thing. He copies his other big sitcom at the time.
Bazinga.
Yeah, Lorre also created The Big Bang Theory, and his solution was to introduce a new character into 2.5 Men's story. Walden Schmidt, played by Ashton Kutcher. And as this season, season 9, was going into production, there was so much hype around it. The entire advertising campaign was based around how are they going to introduce the new guy. It's the only time I've seen a TV show where everybody knows what's going to happen, but they still want to see it. Like seriously, one of the fundamental pieces of writing advice is your story should be ahead of the audience. But here, everyone knew what was coming. They were just waiting for it to happen. When that first episode of season 9 came out, over 28 million people watched the episode live. That's almost double what the show was pulling in weekly. It would slowly taper off, but by the end of the season, things were back to normal. The first episode of season 9 opens with Charlie's funeral, and all of the women he's ever dated are there just to make sure he's dead. That's a good bit, I like that. It honestly feels more like a roast than a tribute. And you know, Chuck Lorre? Fair enough. You didn't ask to be thrown into the public eye like that. I guess this is your way of getting revenge. Now look, Chuck Lorre is in an unenviable position. He has to try save this show when the core piece of the dynamic is missing. I wouldn't want to have to do that, but man, There had to have been a better way to do it than this. Charlie's character was a caricature of a very particular guy. Someone in their 30s and 40s who's wealthy and afraid of commitment enough that they can go around having casual relationships with women. This was a guy that existed in the world at one point. It was Charlie Sheen. In 2003, when 2.5 Men started, bizarrely, that guy was cool to a lot of people. They made an entire character in How I Met Your Mother based on that stereotype. But by 2011, when this new season of 2.5 Men was starting, that guy had already begun to fade a bit, and the internet nerd stereotype was starting to emerge. If the show had continued with Charlie Sheen, it probably would have just stayed the same and then eventually ended. Walden, on the other hand, is a billionaire tech guy who sold some startup, and it just couldn't be further away from what 2.5 Men was. I guess the idea was a clean break from everything that came before. What makes this really insufferable is that it's the 2011 idea of the tech industry, where tech CEOs are secret geniuses and really ripped and the modern renaissance man. It would take about 11 years before Elon Musk would buy Twitter, and then everyone would agree this is nonsense. They don't even say what Walden did or made or anything. All they allude to is that he was making a website and Microsoft bought it, and then they make a joke about the Zune.
Then they bundled it with their iPod killer, the Zune.
Now, that's scary, because that wasn't the type of jokes that 2.5 Men made. It was all lowbrow humor, but it wasn't really referential to pop culture. That was part of the appeal. If you put cultural references that are dated, when that episode airs again as a rerun, it's not gonna work. You need to do at least something with the reference so it works if you don't know what it is. But here, the joke is just the Zune. And that's like the tip of the iceberg. The other major problem is, Walden doesn't really have any flaws. Like, Charlie was rich, but he wasn't a billionaire, and because this is based on the 2011 tech guy, they don't really give him any serious character flaws. He's rich, he's handsome, he's the most reasonable one. He's boring is what he is. They do introduce him by showing him divorced and emotionally immature, but you already had that character. One of the main problems with Walden isn't even him. It's just that by him existing, the writers don't know what to do with Alan anymore. So you have one character who sucks, another one that is now functionally useless, and a child. And it's pretty obvious by the end of the season that they have no idea what they're doing, because they end up sending Jake the child into the army. And in the intro for the next season, they show him in his army uniform. To quote a very famous YouTuber, what were they thinking? Oh hey, it's June 28th, 2012. The first episode of Anger Management is about to air. I wonder how they're gonna start it.
You can't fire me. I quit. Think you can replace me with some other guy? You may think I'm losing, but I'm not. Anyway, you get the idea.
That's actually how it starts. This is the highest viewed premiere for a sitcom in cable television history. Did you even know it existed? It's at this point that the cracks in the new version of 2.5 Men are starting to show. I mean, Lorre did do it. He successfully saved the show. The only problem was he sacrificed everything that made the show what it was to do it. If Walden Schmidt was intended to be a clean break from the past, I'm sorry, they failed. Because with Charlie dead, somehow the show ended up becoming even more about him. He hangs over this entire show like a ghost. In one episode, literally, where he's reincarnated into the body of Kathy Bates. There's another where Alan starts pretending he's Charlie, and it just keeps going and going. 2.5 Men was never a particularly good show, but it had a strong identity. Remember before, when I was saying 2.5 Men's greatest strength was that it combined all of those classic sitcom ideas together? Now it was just the Big Bang Theory, but worse. Walden's laptop has a Foursquare sticker. He drives an electric car, and his house has Star Wars figures. Where does this stereotype even come from? Every tech guy I know lives like Patrick Bateman. Look, all I'm saying is, if your show starts having Patton Oswalt in it, and he's actually playing a nerd, maybe it's time to shut everything down. But they don't. And it goes on for another season, and this time there's even more behind the scenes drama. The guy who plays Jake has been baptized and became religious, so now he doesn't want to do the show. 2.5 Men has lost their half a man. This is just the fate of the show from this point on. It can't escape Charlie's shadow, and the characters are too stale to really do anything good. It's not about trying to do something new, It's an attempt to Weekend at Bernie's a corpse. And because Jake leaves the story, they introduce a new character to be the half man. And it's a woman? I have no idea how this got approved. This was 2014. Women's suffrage was like a century old. And to make matters worse, she's Charlie's daughter. So there is now a permanent character who every time they are on screen, they are being defined by their connection to Charlie Sheen. It's been like 3 years since Winning happened. His spirit is being evoked in every scene. It's like the show is a Ouija board.
Wow. It's like Charlie Sheen's house.
Then we get to the final season. Season 12 happens. And by this point, this shit is so off the rails. We're so far removed from where the show started that I am now going to tell you what the plotline for this season is. And you're not going to believe me. Okay, you ready? It is a season-long gay joke. Walden and Alan, who are straight, get gay married so that they can adopt a baby. And now, Charlie's daughter from the last season is only in 3 episodes of season 12. They flushed that character. I've never seen a show derail this much. It's like a Simpsons joke. Let's go back to Chuck Lorre's vanity cards for a second. When 2.5 Men started, he laid out something he called the 2.5 Men Pledge. We assume an intelligent audience holding remote controls. The only laughter you will hear is the laughter of real people. We will do no very special episodes. Nobody's having a baby. No one's getting married. Someone is getting divorced. Our characters are flawed, yet smart. Pop culture references are cheap, easy, and date the show. We will not do them. I don't think any of these statements are true by this point. The show laid out a bunch of rules for its own existence, and then directly contradicted those rules to preserve the show. But by doing that, they sacrificed the show itself. It's like a Faustian bargain. As 2.5 Men drew to a close and started getting its affairs in order, rumors started popping up across the board. Is Charlie coming back? Surely they would get him back for the final episode. That Winning meme was like 4 years ago. And I'm not saying Charlie Sheen is a good guy. The phrase 9/11 comes up on his Wikipedia page way too much for that to be the case. But he admitted his behavior was wrong and wanted to make amends. And it was pretty obvious he wasn't doing well when all of the Winning stuff happened. Like, yeah, the show has derailed massively, but the best way to wrap up the show would be to go back to where it started, the original 2.5 Men. It wasn't Lorre's fault Sheen acted out and they had to fire him. If they nailed the ending, it would redeem the lost 4 years. Eventually, the show's marketing picks up on this, and it starts to lean into the idea of Charlie coming back. Whispers start emerging. Charlie Sheen wanted to come back, but they wouldn't let him? Or is that narrative a lie? Is it all one big fake out so that some secret twist really gets us? And that was the sort of confusion and fever that people were going into the final episode with. And you know, after all of that time, after all of those stories, I think we are finally ready to discuss the ending to 2.5 Men. The final episode begins with the reveal that Charlie was never dead. His death was faked. It turns out his stalker has been keeping Charlie in her basement for years, and as of this episode, he's finally escaped. Weirdly, Alan and his mother get oddly threatening messages from a random number, and everybody else in Charlie's life is getting huge amounts of money anonymously. All of Charlie's girlfriends are receiving apologies in the post too. It turns out Charlie is out for revenge, and he's going to murder Alan, then Walden, and then himself. This is a real screenshot of the show, by the way. I have a feeling nobody would have believed me if I didn't say that. Towards the beginning of the episode, at the end of one of the scenes, something strange happens.
I can't wait for this to be over.
Was that scripted? That felt way too real, man. The show's never done anything like this before. It's made meta jokes, but it's never broke the continuity. And it's this bizarre moment where the show acknowledges it failed. It tried its best and it wasn't good enough. If you wanted a satisfying ending, it's not gonna be here. There is genuinely a CGI sequence in this episode, and it is so ugly. It looks exactly like the movie Food Fight, and I don't know if that was on purpose or not, because Charlie Sheen is the main character in Food Fight. It seems like a stretch, but it's not like the rest of this makes any sense.
That's all, folks.
Okay, I've tried to be normal about this, and I think I've succeeded for about 39 minutes, but what the f*** is going on? How am I supposed to analyze that? It doesn't even feel like a human made it. So, the characters report to the chief of police about Charlie coming back to hunt them, and the chief of police is played by, obviously, Arnold Schwarzenegger. And as he's interviewing them to get info on Charlie, it turns into another way to make fun of the viewer's intelligence.
And then your dead brother's previously unknown lesbian daughter shows up.
Can't write this stuff, huh?
That happens, Jake eventually turns up again, and this happens.
Amazing that you've made so much money with such stupid jokes.
And it's at this point that the finale reveals what it actually is. It's a meta joke episode making fun of how bad 2.5 Men is, and how stupid you are for watching it. I've watched a lot of TV in my life, but I have never seen a show so openly hate the audience that made it. I think this is a landmark moment in TV history. It's a show that throughout its entire run has been lowbrow humor, so critics aren't going to like it. But then it makes fun of the only people who watch it, so today, in 2024, nobody on earth defends this show. This show was prolonged because Lorre didn't want to say goodbye to these characters yet, and now is openly trying to murder them. The characters accept they're going to die, say goodbye to their loved ones, and none of them care. It's a bitter, hateful episode, and we haven't even talked about the final bit yet. Throughout this final episode, there's another running narrative. Chuck Lorre isn't making fun of Charlie the character in all of these scenes. He's systematically taking down Charlie Sheen. Charlie Sheen read the script and refused to appear in the episode, so they can't use him, but they can use his likeness because he was a character on the show, and thus you have the CGI sequence, and the off-screen mentions of him. And there are so many sneak disses at him throughout this. Those threatening text messages they were getting, they had phrases like, "You despicable troll," "My army of assassins," and "Tiger's blood." All of these are references to things Sheen said in 2011. When the two of them get interviewed by Arnold Schwarzenegger, there's a joke about Charlie trying anger management, but it didn't work. And at one point, Walden searches online to see if there's any information on Charlie's death, but all he finds is one weird rant against a former employer. I'm now gonna pull back for a second. Charlie Sheen's winning shit happened in February 2011. This finale aired 4 years after that in February 2015. Now all of this happened a long time ago, so maybe you don't remember exactly how giant that difference is. Here's a short list of things that happened between those two dates. Mitt Romney fails to get elected. Dark Souls, Coney 2012, Gangnam Style, Death Grips, SOPA, George Lucas sells Star Wars, the Higgs boson is found, the London Olympics, the Harlem Shake, Vine, Edward Snowden, Ice JJ Fish, Five Nights at Freddy's, Darude Sandstorm, the Ice Bucket Challenge, Uptown Funk, weed is legalized in parts of the US, Uber, Flappy Bird, Jay-Z gets his ass beat in a lift. Chuck Lorre kept his grudge for that long. And he made it the problem of all of the viewers, the one people who do not deserve this. And then that brings us to the final scene of 2.5 Men. It took 12 years to get to this point. Charlie walks up to the front door of the house, it's shot from behind, it's clearly not him, and then a piano falls out of the sky onto him, but the camera just hangs there. It eventually pulls back and reveals Chuck Lorre sitting in the director's chair, and he turns to the camera and says,
"Winning."
I feel like it kind of speaks for itself. But the vanity card. The vanity card for this episode is so unbelievable. Let's read it together. Why not? We've made it this far. I know a lot of you might be disappointed that you didn't get to see Charlie Sheen in tonight's finale. For the record, he was offered a role. Our idea was to have him walk up to the front door in the last scene, ring the doorbell, then turn, look directly into the camera, and go off on a maniacal rant about the dangers of drug abuse. He would then explain that these dangers only apply to average people, that he was far from average. He was a ninja warrior from Mars. He was invincible, and then we would drop a piano on him. We thought it was funny. He didn't. Instead, he wanted us to write a heartwarming scene that would set up his return to primetime TV in a new sitcom called The Harpers, starring him and the guy who plays Alan. We thought that was funny too. That was the ending to 2.5 Men, a show about a guy who just dates random women and has a divorced brother. That was the ending. A show that was born out of the necessity for healthcare. A show that became a passion project for a lot of people. And then a show that died the slowest death possible and was buried at sea. In Lorre's quest to take down Charlie Sheen, he burned every piece of goodwill the show had. He created the worst ending to a sitcom of all time. An ending that insulted the viewer's intelligence and pleased no one except the people who already disliked the show. It went against everything that made the original show work, just so Chuck Lorre could discuss things that happened outside of the show. I just want to reiterate, the final season followed 2 straight main characters who got gay married to adopt a baby, and then 2.5 Men ended in a murder-suicide plot that turned needlessly meta and failed in every conceivable way. Why am I the first person to make this video? Lorre, you won! Don't you see? You're the one who's on TV still. Charlie Sheen's entire acting career is now a footnote in his breakdown. You're the one who permanently shaped the landscape of entertainment, but instead of wrapping the show up with a satisfying ending, you did this. You had the perfect opportunity to say goodbye, and you said no. I'm not a guy who likes to over-exaggerate the title of YouTube videos, but can you legitimately think of a sitcom ending worse than this? Oh, How I Met Your Mother had a bad ending. Did it end in a murder-suicide though? In late 2023, Chuck Lorre released a new show called Bookie, and nobody has heard of it even though it's on HBO Max. The very first episode of the show, directed by Lorre himself, features Charlie Sheen playing himself as a recovering drug addict. And the same scene also has the guy who plays Jake. And the whole thing they're doing is a deliberate reference to the pilot of 2.5 Men. A very public conflict was resolved behind the scenes in private. It's the perfect ending to this story. And nobody even cares it happened. 2.5 Men is one of the most simple shows in existence. The whole time it was on the air, TV critics complained about how simple it was. But it has one of the most complex stories in entertainment history hidden inside it. But because of Lorre, it's a story that nobody even remembers. Today, Lorre's biggest legacy isn't even 2.5 Men. It's his influence on everything else to come out of the world of TV. Young Sheldon ends a few days after this video goes up, and there's already another spin-off planned. This is Chuck Lorre's world, and we're all just living in it. Yo, it's Jay. I hope you enjoyed the video. I don't really think of this one as an essay, it felt more like an autopsy working on it. If you enjoyed it and want to help me make more stuff like it, I have a Patreon. My friend Colin and I also host a monthly film podcast called Labyrinth of Cinema. The last episode was on Juzo Itami's Mimbo. Amazing movie if you haven't seen it. And if you want to talk to me, you can hit me up on Twitter. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
Go ahead. How was Santa Barbara?
I have to go now. My planet needs me.